Welcome to the Festival of Storytellers. I thank everybody that's involved with this process, because we know writers need readers and writers need publishers.
Experience is not about the publisher, it is about us, the authors.
Hey, greetings, everyone. My name is Russell Rucker. I'm the author of Textualism and Originalism in Our Constitutional Republic. There's a poster right above my head on that. I'm also the author of Our Founders and Their Words and Why They Matter, and that's off to my left. Now, my books are about the Constitution and our founding, of which I've studied for many years. I'd like to thank Reader's Magnet for giving me the opportunity to be on the Festival of Storytellers. And our topic today is I'm going to get in and discuss Washington a little bit, because he is our first president and he's unique in that sense. This is my studio here that I use for a YouTube channel in which I discuss constitutional issues, just so you understand where we're coming from. But George Washington was born February 22nd, 1732, which is exactly a month from today. Now, years ago, Washington's birthday was a national holiday, and we had two presidents who had birthdays that were national holidays. You had Abraham Lincoln, who was our 16th president, and you had George Washington. Eventually, our government decided to lump them together into President's Day, so they're now on equal with presidents like Polk and Buchanan and Hayes and a lot of people we never heard of. But Washington is really unique among our presidents. The big reason is he's the only president that didn't belong to a political party. If you look at history books, they like to lump him in with the Federalists, but he may have agreed with the Federalists, but he was never an actual member. Okay. Now, his birthday was celebrated by the Federalists when he was in office. But the Republican Party that Jefferson founded would refuse to celebrate it because they didn't think that it was proper to celebrate a birthday of a sitting president. Washington deserves a lot of credit for a lot of things. He did quite a bit in his life. He was a surveyor for Culpeper County, for instance. He also contracted smallpox while on a trip to the West Indies. He inherited Mount Vernon from his father. He served in the French and Indian War, And the French and Indian War on our side of the world was really a world war that was called the 7-Year War by England. And you had a couple of groups of Indians who were fighting on one side or the other, either with the French or the British. And in the end, England had gained a tremendous amount of territory, and France was really pushed off the continent. The only thing they had left was the West Indies and a spot in South America. So they were relegated off of the continent. Washington served in the French and Indian War as a colonel, and he was really an important member of the military, and he got a lot done. He was instrumental in making peace with the Iroquois Confederacy, which is a big group of Indians, mostly around what is now the Great Lakes. He also was engaged in the Virginia militia, and a lot of our founders really understood the militia system well because they were involved in it. In 1759, he married Martha Curtis, who was a wealthy widow woman in her own right, and they got married on the 12th day of Christmas. When you listen to the lyrics of 12 Days of Christmas, and it goes through a partridge in a pear tree and all these other items, it really isn't just language in a song. It's how our founders that celebrated Christmas, and they didn't all celebrate it, but it's how they celebrated the 12 days of Christmas. Eventually, the Industrial Revolution ended these long celebrations because they wanted people back in the factories. But he even had a camel brought in one time during the Christmas celebration. It was a big thing to find the greatest, most outrageous kind of thing for these celebrations. Washington even gave his slaves 4 days off. Yes, Washington was a big slave owner, and he freed his slaves at the end of his life, and his will even gave money to help educate them and prepare them. And there was even funds for those that couldn't work, for subsistence for the rest of their lives. He served in the House of Burgess and the Virginia legislature. At one point, the House of Burgess was actually dissolved by British because they didn't like what was going on there. He had quite the farm, kind of a plantation, and he did horse racing. He raised horses. He started raising tobacco, but switched to wheat, and he milled his wheat there. I mean, he really was active on his plantation. He served in the First and Second Continental Congress, and when he got sent up to the Second Continental Congress, he was made a commander-in-chief of the Army and Navy as they were declaring their independence. And Washington, in a speech, did say that he would now have to enforce the Declaration of Independence. In other words, we'd have to fight a war to keep our independence. He was opposed to the Townshend Acts, and he helped Mason with the British boycott of goods. They were trying to stop Britain from trading until they accepted our independence. He also helped enforce the Continental Association. But after Lexington, and once he was commander-in-chief, he took the forces and he worked real hard trying to get our independence. And that's why he missed the signing of the Declaration. But like I mentioned earlier, he did have to enforce it, even though he didn't sign it. He served as president of the convention, of the Constitutional Convention. And this painting that is behind me, and I believe it's on the first panel over there, you see George Washington overlooking the group. And this painting is the signing of the Constitution, and it hangs in the Capitol building today. But there you have him as that's the first time he served as president of anything, at least to my knowledge. But after the war, he said goodbye to his troops, said his farewell address to the troops, and he went home. He turned in his commission to Congress and he went home. And this is really the story of Washington. See, Washington wasn't trying to be president of anything or in charge of anything. What he really wanted was to serve out his time on his home, on his plantation, spend time with his wife. And he was a very religious man, a very pious man. He wrote sermons to his wife, and he would write sermons during the day, and he would give them at night, and he even found time on the battlefield to pray. There are stories of bullet holes through his uniform, but yet he was never hit, and it's surmised that God was protecting him. So it's really a kind of interesting thing that he would give up his commission. And when he was serving in the Constitutional Convention that I pointed out a minute ago, he would open the meeting and then he would step aside and let Gorham take over as the chair of the Committee of the Whole. And I remember a fellow asking me why he would do this. And I think the reason is because he was such a giant of an intellectual man, the people would just naturally follow him. So he was trying to step aside and allow others the opportunity to speak. And much as Franklin, for instance, would speak quite a bit too, but he too was trying to only speak when he felt it was necessary on a matter of great importance. Because there were really 2 or 3 people in the convention of very aging statesmen, as we would call them today. Once the Constitution was done and it was approved, he wrote and just at the end of the convention, he actually wrote the letter to Congress explaining why they had done what they did. See, the Constitutional Convention was actually set up to make changes to the Articles of Confederation, which was our first Constitution. And James Madison went about creating an entire new document, and a lot of what we have today comes right from the Virginia Plan, which I will talk about later in the week. Now, much of it comes from there with the arguments back and forth in the convention, and he was seeking approval from Washington first before the convention even began. And then he went to the convention. He tried to get people to come one way or the other and make decisions on how they were going to vote. He had gotten a list, and they were going through this process. Following the convention, Washington went home again. He had no intention of serving as a president, but he won in a landslide of everyone voting for him for president. And one of the members was sent down to his plantation to tell him that, instruct him that he had been given the role of the first president of the United States, and that the people wanted him. And he made a statement along the lines that he always trusted in what the people had to say, and that he could not say no to his fellow countrymen. So he came up to New York City, and they took a Bible from a neighboring church. They gave him the oath of office, and at the end of the oath of office that's required in the Constitution, he added these words, "So help me God." And that is how that became part of our oath. And then he turned to Congress and he gave an opening address. And as president, he really had a lot of firsts, a lot of trying to set up a government. He had to make appoint cabinet appointees. He had to make appointees for a international delegation to discuss things with foreign dignitaries. And it was his idea to never leave the United States. So he would send dignitaries around to do the kind of work that would normally have been needed by the head of state. And that was really his idea. So he set up a cabinet, and he appointed the first Supreme Court, the Chief Justice, and he went about trying to set up a government. During the first Congress, you had James Madison running around trying to get a Bill of Rights through. And it was a difficult job because people were just trying to set up the government at the time. So it became, almost a burden to get that taken care of. But they continued on, and he did an awful lot of good for our country. He got the Judicial Act passed, for instance. And at the end of his second term, he decided that enough was enough. He had to deal with infighting in his cabinet, and I'll talk about that later in the week too. And all this went on, and he decided that 2 terms were enough. And that's really the big reason we have a 2-term limit today in our Constitution, because it was added because FDR had served 4 terms. But it was Washington's idea to only serve 2 terms and go home. He didn't want to serve forever. He wanted a chance to live out his life on his plantation. And at the end, he gave a farewell address, and he warned the people about political parties that had really kind of tore his cabinet apart. And he made statements such as a political party would be loyal to its own and not to the country. And he warned us about entangling alliances with Europe. Like today, we have like NATO treaties and treaties with other countries all over. Well, he warned us against doing that. Stay out of entangling alliances, he said. So really, there was an awful lot there that he was really working towards. And he never served one party or another. He had both of the leaders of the political parties in his cabinet, which would be Hamilton as the head of the Federalists and Jefferson as the head of the Republicans. So it really was quite a burden for him. Now, I have a couple questions here. First of all, from Kathy, it seems like something everyone should already know, but I'm sure everyone can benefit from educating themselves with the topic. Well, Kathy, everyone should know. But unfortunately, a lot of the things that happen just aren't taught in our schools anymore. It's really a shame. Washington should get a tremendous credit for helping to set this country up. He did nothing for himself. The revolution did not come. He was not his creation. It came to him. And he did all he could to achieve the goals for the good of the country. Sayana says, do you think your book will remain relevant in the years to come? Well, the thing about my book and the books I've written and work on, they're timeless. They have nothing to do with modern politics or modern history. So I think they will remain relevant. I think they can remain timeless. Much as our founders tried to make our Constitution perpetual, I have tried to do the same here, so that it matters. Perpetual in the argument of the Constitution means that you can always add amendments to it. It wasn't meant for a 50-year term. It was meant to go on forever. And that really is the beauty of our Constitution today. And so I really give Washington a lot of credit. He maintained a lot of order. He went to dinner parties at the Constitutional Convention, one on 4th of July, for instance, while they were celebrating independence. And he really was a man of the hour. And this was a place that he really shined. And he was just wonderfully experienced in that realm. Elizabeth asks, how do you break down such a complex topic? Well, what I've done is I've wrote small essays in my book, Our Founders, about a whole pile of different founders, and some of them, are only active in a certain point of, maybe they were active, like Samuel Adams was active in instigating the revolution to begin with. And John Hancock was busy with trade, and Robert Morris was busy with getting funds. And so I've broken it down to try to explain it and explain the historical aspect and how things happened the way they were. See, my thesis, I guess you could call, is that the Constitution it becomes important historical document because the history and what was going on helps to explain the Constitution. And that's really where I've been trying to get at, is make my fellow citizens understand the document itself, understand the why we had to do what we did. For instance, why is there a first and a second and a third amendment, for instance? And why are these things of importance, and what do they really mean in the complex? And in order to understand original intent, you need to understand the founding. And so I think that's really where I'm at. Jennifer says, I believe this topic should be something even the youth must be exposed to. But will they be able to consume your book with no trouble? Yes, I think they can. I've been told that I've simplified things. I've made things easy to understand. And the other thing is, when you've got a book that's a couple hundred pages long, it's a lot easier to break down if you've got chapters on different things. For instance, I have a chapter on the Alien Sedition Acts. My first chapter is on the holidays. And yes, I get into a whole bunch of different founders and stuff in there, and I use quotations that they gave to explain certain things that were going on. So I've used their own words in the discussion. And so, yes, I believe the youth could get a lot from it. For one thing, a single chapter could be taken by itself and read through. So some of these chapters last only 2 or 3 pages, and others maybe go on for 15 or so. So you do have a chance to read a specific part of it and understand. So I think the youth would gain a lot from this book, but not just the youth. Even all of us as a refresher on what happened, and a discussion of things, little tidbits information that really none of us really knew, things I discovered along the way. And all of these become important pieces of information, an important thing for the understanding of what occurred, why we have the kind of government we have today. So I really hope that helps you a lot. And let's move on here a little bit. Timothy says nobody really thinks about the work that goes into making a country work, let alone founding one. Well, that's true. But the interesting thing about our founding and our republic is that we were self-governing. Nobody else was really self-governing. You had a king who, in most of the countries, you had tyrants running around that were involved in running countries. So this was a lot different. And our founders went back to ancient Rome and Greece. They looked at Magna Carta. They looked at everything they could find on self-government. And they were very concerned about anyone achieving too much power. So they divided up power. For instance, like in the legislative branch, you have two parts. You have the Senate and the House. Now, all these divisions and an independent judiciary and the executive different, and everybody having different roles and duties is what really makes it unique. Riley asks, what's the significance of your body, especially on today's youth? What's the significance of your book, especially on today's youth? Well, I think that our youth could learn an awful lot. One of the things is most of these people gave up everything. They gave up, as the Declaration says, our sacred honor, our wealth, our good name. They're putting everything on the line for the good of the country, not the good for themselves. And I think that when people look at each other themselves, they need to look at the fact that they're cogs in a machine. They're all working together. They all achieve things by themselves, and they can move on and achieve great things. But they're still working for the good of humanity. And I think that's an important thing for our youth to really understand today. Now, I just want to give you my my website address, russelljrucker.com. You can even get a signed copy of my book there if that's what you want to do. You can get my book on Amazon, Barnes and Noble. So there's a number of places that you can actually get a copy of my book. This is my book, Our Founders in Their Words and Why They Matter. And there's a lot of interesting things here, and just different things that really come to fascinating different things that were said. For instance, in Washington's farewell address, he says, he gives this explanation, best explanation I've ever heard for taxation is essential that you should practically bear in mind that towards the payment of debts, there must be revenue. That to have revenue, there must be taxes. That no taxes can be devised which are not more or less inconvenient or unpleasant. And on parties generally, he says, they serve to organize factions, to give an artificial and extraordinary force, to put in the place of delegated will of a nation the will of a party. And when you talk about factions, in the context of 1789, you're talking about political parties. Pauline, what's your motivation to keep writing books? Well, my motivation for writing these books has been the lack of knowledge among people that should know. When I hear news reports and I hear news reports that are incorrect, telling us things that are in our Constitution that aren't. And that really was the crux of my my decision to write my first book. And the second book I wrote because I thought, I haven't really said enough. And I would like the American people to fully understand what exactly we have and the importance of it. So you can also see me on, I do constitutional talks on YouTube. And I do public speaking when I have the opportunity. And I have done a few book shows with Reader's Magnet. And I'd like to once again thank Reader's Magnet for all they've done for me. This is an important subject that I'm trying to make our citizens understand. And with that, I'd like to say goodbye to you for today. Tomorrow, we're going to go in and discuss textualism and originalism and the living, breathing theory of our Constitution. And I'm going to get in more detail on that. And I hope you continue to join me. And thank you very much for your time. You have a good afternoon now.